So, quick note before I begin. As the title implies, I will be discussing both endings of Clair Obscur. So if you haven't finished the game, this is not the video for you. I do not want to be the person who ruins this magnificent game for anyone else. But if you've already finished the game or seen the endings, then I'm happy to have you. Let's get started. In Clair Obscur Expedition 33, it's widely believed that siding with Verso is the hard, but morally right choice. You destroy the painting and bring Myel back to the real world to properly deal with her grief. After all, she's a traumatized child clinging to a fantasy world to avoid her pain. Letting her stay would be enabling a delusion. Letting go of this world is painful, but necessary, right? Any grief counselor would tell you, healing means facing reality. You can't move forward if you keep hiding in a dream. So the choice seems clear. Let her escape into illusion, or pull her back to confront her pain and ultimately heal. But there's just one problem. That fantasy, it's not just in her head. It's a living, conscious world filled with people who think, who feel, who suffer and die. So when you choose to destroy the painting, you're not just ending a dream, you're killing a world. Now, the usual defense is that the world inside the painting isn't real. The game tells us outright, it's a fantasy crafted by Verso's magic. So the thinking goes, reality must take priority. But what does it actually mean for something to be real? The world of Clair Obscur is filled with conscious beings who live, learn, love, and grieve. They have history, memory, continuity of experience. They suffer, they hope. What's more real than that? Consider this. If we learn tomorrow, definitively, that God exists, and that our entire world was created by a divine will, would that make you less real? Would the fact that we were created by a higher power justify our destruction? If the answer is no, and I suspect it is, then how can you justify dismissing the painting's inhabitants? What's the meaningful distinction between conscious beings who are composed of atoms and those composed of paint? If they think, feel, and suffer just as deeply, then surely they deserve moral consideration just as fully. As the player, we explore this world. We build a connection to its people. We laugh with them. We fight with them. Grieve with them. Is any of that less true the moment you learn their world is a painting? If this world existed only in Myel's mind, I'd agree. The right thing to do would be to help her manage her grief productively. But it doesn't. It's a world as real as the one we or the Deontological family inhabit. The moment you take consciousness seriously, the moral framing of these endings collapses. By siding with Verso, you're not just helping a traumatized girl to heal. You're sentencing an entire world of conscious beings to oblivion. And look, I get it. I understand the motivation to help Maelle. I wanted to as well. But there's more at stake here than the mental health of one girl. When billions of lives hang in the balance, good intentions just aren't enough. Now, maybe you're still not convinced. Maybe you think the painting's inhabitants might matter to some degree, but the Deontological family's suffering takes priority. And it's true that they have endured unimaginable loss, trapped in a cycle of guilt and grief. But no matter your moral framework, the conclusion still seems obvious. Let's say you're a consequentialist. You believe the right choice is the one that produces the best overall outcome, usually the most happiness or the least suffering. So let's run the numbers. On one side, you have 4 people in very real pain, a family grieving the loss of Verso. On the other, you have billions of conscious beings whose lives, relationships, dreams, and futures will all be wiped out if the painting ends. Even if you believe the painting's people were only, say, half as real, only partially conscious, you're still talking about the extinction of a civilization. There is no version of consequentialism where that trade makes sense. But maybe you don't need to do moral calculus to know when something feels wrong. Maybe you just believe there are lines that should never be crossed, no matter the cost. So ask yourself, is it ever morally acceptable to annihilate an entire civilization of innocent people just to help 4 others grieve more effectively? Would you press a button that ends all of life in a world just to ease the pain of one family? Surely a deontologist would say no, because those people, however they were created, have moral standing. They are ends in themselves. You can't kill them even for noble reasons. That's not compassion, it's injustice. Now, there's still one final argument that deserves to be taken seriously. Maybe the only one that could tip the scales back towards Verso's ending. What about Myel's decision to force Painted Verso to keep living? Painted Verso knows he isn't the real Verso. He's a construct, a reflection created by a grieving mother who couldn't bear the loss of her son. And eventually, he grows tired of that existence. So he asks Maelle to unpaint him, to let him go. She refuses. And on the surface, this seems selfish. She's already lost her brother once and can't bear to do so again. But the situation is more complicated than it seems. There are 2 possibilities here. First, if Myel could have simply unpainted Verso without consequences, then of course she should have respected his choice. Forcing someone to continue suffering just to spare yourself pain isn't mercy, it's control. But that's not the situation we're given, because it appears that for Painted Verso to truly die, the fragment of the real Verso, the soul still painting this world, must also die. And if that happens, the world ends. So now the choice isn't between freedom and control, it's between the continued life of one suffering person and the erasure of an entire world. And we know that Painted Verso's existence isn't pure suffering. Throughout the game, we see him laugh, learn, connect, and grow. His life is painful, sure, but it still has value. He's not trapped in maximal agony. He's living. Of course, that still leaves the soul fragment. The faceless boy we encounter again and again turns out to be the final piece of Verso's soul, the one holding the painting together. If he stops painting, the world disappears. And he seems lost, tired, maybe even desperate to stop. This brings to mind the city of Omlis, a fictional utopia where the happiness of every citizen depends on the suffering of a single child. Some might say Maelle has created her own version of Omlis. By preserving the painting, she condemns the soul fragment of Verso to eternal labor so that the world she loves can survive. And yes, if that were the whole story, it would be damning. But that's where the comparison breaks down, because unlike the child in Omlis, Verso, the whole Verso, chose this world. He created it, he populated it, and he sustains it. He didn't wake up in a prison, he built the kingdom. And when you create a world filled with thinking, feeling people, you inherit responsibility for it. You don't get to burn it down just because you're tired. That's not tragedy, that's abandonment. Now, to be clear, I don't think Myel made this decision from a place of perfect moral clarity. She wasn't weighing ethical theories. She was grieving, afraid, trying not to lose her brother again. And yes, her reasons may have been selfish in many ways. But that doesn't change the outcome. Sometimes the right choice comes from the wrong place. And in this case, even if Myel's motives were conflicted, the result is clear. She didn't end the world, she preserved it. I don't think the writers of Clair Obscur meant for Myel's ending to be the right one. The emotional arc clearly points towards Verso, letting go, ending the cycle of grief, returning to reality. It's framed as the bittersweet but ultimately correct choice. And from a distance, that story makes sense. Myel is a child in pain. The painting is a means for her to escape trauma. Forcing her to deal with her pain rather than hide from it feels like the difficult but compassionate ending. But once you look closely, that framing collapses under its own weight. Because this world isn't just an escape mechanism for a broken young girl. It's a world filled with people who think, feel, and suffer. A world with continuity, history, and love. And when you destroy it, you're not helping someone heal, you're erasing a civilization. And that's the dissonance. The writers wanted to tell a story about ending the cycle of grief. But by building a world so rich, so emotionally alive, they accidentally made Myel's choice the moral one. Not because she's a hero, not because she's selfless, but because she refuses to destroy innocent, sentient lives. Maybe the writers didn't mean to tell that story, but it is the one they told. And if you're still convinced that destroying the painting was the right call, that preserving a world full of conscious life was just clinging to a fantasy, then ask yourself one question. What makes a life real?